My second foray into listening to books I'd previously read was this one, Nihal, della terra, vento, from the trilogy Cronache del mondo emerso. This is what I consider to be the first proper book I read in Italian. I read the whole trilogy between July and December of 2021, finishing just about 1 year after I'd started learning the language. The thing is, I never really properly spoke about this book or the trilogy because I wasn't doing book reviews then. I'd just started reading in other languages after all. So it feels fitting that I can now do that. Spotify does have the other two. Links to all three are in the description. This is fantasy, as you can almost certainly guess from the cover. Nihal is the girl pictured, a half-elf. Alongside her is another main character, Senar, a young mage. They're not always together in this trilogy, but it's basically their joint journeys. Or should I say, destinies. It is fantasy, after all. They live in a world made up of different territories that are all being terrorized by an all-powerful character, Il Tiranno, the big villain of the piece. There's plenty of magic involved, obviously. If you have mages and fantastical characters populating the world, there will be magic, and, yes, there are dragons. Is fantasy really fantasy without dragons? Well, yes, but everyone loves a dragon, don't they? The story covers a lot of territory, and I don't just mean the land. I mean a lot of different environments and situations. This is the book where I first learnt what a folletto is. See this video if you want to know. And that a radura is a forest or woodland clearing. And a giaciglio is a straw bed. Well, I learnt a lot more than that, but those are the ones that stick out for some reason. I guess because a lot of the vocabulary is passive, but those words aren't. This trilogy will always have a special place in my heart for being my first proper read, and for finding my first Italian author that I loved, Licia Troisi. So what was it like listening to this book? Well, it is narrated by the author for a start. I knew I could understand her because there is a podcast on Spotify that was kind of a summarised version of her astrophysics book, which I listened to sometime after reading the book. It was non-fiction, of course, which is always easier to understand, and podcasts tend to be slower and have more gaps to catch up. But I could understand it pretty well. I suppose you could call that my first attempt at listening to something I'd read, but it wasn't quite the same thing, and not nearly as long. However, when I started this, I did have to slow it down to 0.8 times speed. I had upped that about halfway through chapter 1 to 0.9 times, and kept it at that for most of the rest of the book. Although I did test it out at regular speed right near the end, and by then it was okay. I barely noticed the difference. There was far more in this book that I didn't get in terms of individual words than the previous one. But I was still able to understand a huge amount of it and follow the story. Of course, after 4 3/4 years since reading it, I had forgotten a lot of the detail, and especially with such a long and complex story. You can't retain everything for that long. Although I did remember things when hearing them again, so it's still in there somewhere. I did think that some things came earlier though, and that other things hadn't happened so early. In terms of reading this book first time round, I had read quite a lot of fantasy in English, so I knew the kinds of things that would come up. That helps a lot. Definitely read in your favourite genre if you can in another language. And obviously, 3 books over 5 and a bit months is a fair bit slower than I would be reading now. I usually manage at least 1 book in a month, sometimes more than that, depending on the length, of course. I think these 3 books are all around 350 to 400 pages, so that's not excessive for fantasy. It's about half the length of the other one I read recently. Yes, it was more difficult to read at the time because of the length of time I'd been learning Italian, but it wasn't excessively so. So even though I started talking about the audiobook, I'm going to do my regular paragraph translation from the first page proper to see if you think you could read the physical book. A Nihal piaceva starsene là sopra da sola, con la brezza a scompigliarle i lunghissimi capelli. Si sedeva sulle pietre a gambe incrociate, con gli occhi chiusi e la spada di legno appoggiata al fianco, come fanno i veri guerrieri. Quando stava lassù era come pacificata. Poteva concentrarsi solo su se stessa, sui suoi pensieri più nascosti, su quella vaga malinconia che certe volte l'abbracciava, sul mormorio lento che ogni tanto sentiva levarsi dal fondo della sua anima. Nihal liked to be up there alone, with the breeze ruffling her very long hair. She would sit on the stones, her legs crossed, with her eyes closed and her wooden sword laying at her side, like real warriors did. When she was up there, she felt calm. She could concentrate on just herself, on her deeply hidden thoughts, on that slight melancholy that occasionally embraced her, on the slow murmur that, from time to time, she felt rise up from the depths of her soul. And now a short, very belated review in Italian. Cronache del mondo emerso è una trilogia di fantasy epica di della Troisi. Segue le avventure di Nihal, un mezzelfo, e Sennar, un giovane mago. Vivono in un mondo dove c'è sempre una ombra su di loro. Quell'ombra si chiama il tiranno. Il tiranno, un uomo terribile, vuole aver tutti i territori per sé e possiede un enorme esercito di guerrieri, draghi con i loro cavalieri e famine, creature spaventose, molto forti e assetati di sangue. Nihal vuole essere una guerriera, vuole difendere il suo territorio, ma chissà se avrà le competenze per succedere. Sennar vuole diventare un grande mago e fare la differenza nella vita delle persone, ma ci sono molte sfide nella sua strada. Direi che questa trilogia non è facile da leggere, ma non è nemmeno molto difficile. Romanzi di fantasia, come quelli di fantascienza, hanno molte cose inventate per la storia e il mondo. E questo è sempre più difficile all'inizio, ma dopo qualche capitolo diventa meglio. Anche questa trilogia non si basa su questo mondo, quindi non ci sono fatti del passato di questo mondo da comprendere. So, what's next in this audio listening journey? Well, there's the first of another series of della Troisi's on Spotify. I know the voice in both senses, so my ear's in as such. I know the subject, in general terms, sounds more sci-fi than fantasy. Clues, multiverse, and Helm's woman, I assume, of time. I've only read that in French so far, but with the cognates and Troisi's astrophysics book under my belt, should be okay, right? Let's see.